Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into one of the most provocative and honestly one of the most important autobiographies of the 20th century, Emma Goldman's Living My Life. This isn't just a book, it's a monumental record of a life lived right in the thick of radical politics, a life of constant battle and, as we'll see, absolute principle.
So let's get right into it. You have to understand, even for a woman like Emma Goldman, who never ever backed down from a fight, writing this book was a real ordeal. She says it right here. It was like digging up memories she had buried deep down for a reason. This wasn't just jotting down some memories, it was a painful reliving of a life that was just defined by conflict. And that really brings us to the central question we have to ask.
For decades, that name, Red Emma, was basically shorthand for anarchism, for violence, for revolution. To some people, she was terrifying. To others, she was a total hero. But if we really want to understand her ideas, which are still so controversial, we've got to look past that caricature and see the journey that shaped her. And we're going to do it using her own words.
So here's how we're going to trace that journey. We'll look at 5 key parts of her life that she lays out in the book. Her arrival in America, how she found her political voice, her ideas about love and direct action, that crushing disillusionment she felt with the Soviet Revolution, and finally, the one single principle that she held on to through it all. Okay, so her story starts where it did for so many people back then, with a journey to a new world. And for Goldman, a young Jewish immigrant escaping the thumb of Tsarist Russia, America wasn't just a destination, it was this huge, powerful idea. Can you imagine? She sails into New York Harbor, and she sees the Statue of Liberty. To her, it was this incredible, alluring symbol, the actual physical form of the freedom she'd been dreaming about her whole life. This was the promise. But that feeling, it was not going to last.
And wow, this slide just lays out how brutally that dream crashed into reality. On the left, you see the promise, the land of liberty, a new beginning. But on the right, you see what she actually found, what she called appalling scenes at immigration, not a single sympathetic face in Rochester, and just the grim reality of factory work. She talks about her brother-in-law making a measly $12 a week, his life constantly in danger. This wasn't just a letdown, it was a total betrayal of the ideal she had crossed an entire ocean for.
And here's the thing, right? That raw, immediate disillusionment became the seed for her entire political life. The huge gap between what America promised and the brutal reality for poor workers, for her, that wasn't just a shame. It was a betrayal that demanded an answer, and it demanded a fight.
So how does that personal bitterness grow into a public cause? Well, she started looking for answers, for a reason why things were so unjust. And that search led her to the most radical political idea of the day: anarchism. Now, I know for a lot of us, the word anarchism just conjures up images of chaos, right? Disorder, bombs. But that is not what Goldman found. In her world, anarchists were the heroes and martyrs, people who were willing to fight and even die for true human freedom against any kind of oppression, whether it came from the government or from a factory owner.
What's so fascinating here is that she wasn't born this powerful speaker. She admits her first speeches were a circus, that she was like a clown on stage, just sarcastically yelling at workers. But then came this turning point. An old, worn-out worker stood up and asked her the simple, just devastating question. What about us? What about the men who won't live to see your final revolution? Shouldn't we fight for a shorter workday now? And that moment, it just changed everything. It forced her to connect her big ideas to the real, everyday suffering of actual people.
But for her, this wasn't just about giving speeches. Belief meant nothing without action. And that conviction led to probably the most infamous event of her early life, an act of political violence they called an attentat.
The backdrop is the absolutely brutal Homestead strike in Pittsburgh. You've got steelworkers in a violent fight with the Carnegie Steel Company, which was being run by Henry Clay Frick, a guy who was notorious for how much he hated unions. For Goldman and her lover, Alexander Berkman, the news that these workers were being shot down was a call to arms.
As she tells it, their response was immediate. Berkman decided he had to assassinate Frick, but their big plan hit a wall. Their whole fortune, she writes, was just $15. Think about that. And what happens next is just this incredible story of desperation. Goldman actually tries to work as a prostitute for one night to raise money, but she just can't do it. In the end, Berkman goes alone. He fails to kill Frick and gets sentenced to 22 years in prison. And Goldman's role? Well, it shifted. Her job, as she saw it, was now to explain his act to the world, to defend the motivation behind such an extreme act of protest.
Okay, let's fast forward a couple of decades. After years and years of activism, getting arrested, going to prison in the US, Goldman gets deported. In 1919, she's put on a boat and sent to the one place on Earth she thought was a dream come true, Soviet Russia.
I mean, this should have been it, right? The ultimate victory lap. She's being kicked out of capitalist America and sent to the world's very first workers' paradise. It was supposed to be a triumphant homecoming. But what she actually found, and what she wrote about in detail, was a total shock. Instead of free workers, she saw the militarization of labor, turning people into what she called galley slaves. Instead of freedom, she saw the absolute terror of the secret police, the Cheka, and what probably hurt the most was seeing other revolutionaries, anarchists, dissenters, anyone who didn't toe the official Bolshevik line, being thrown in prison, exiled, or even killed.
And this is so crucial to understanding her. This experience was the ultimate test of her entire philosophy. Her horror wasn't about this policy or that one. It was about the state itself. She came to believe that any state with that much coercive power, even one that calls itself revolutionary, becomes the enemy of freedom. In her eyes, the Bolsheviks had just swapped the tyranny of the Tsar for the tyranny of the party.
So where does that leave her? Think about it. Kicked out of America, completely disillusioned with the Soviet experiment, she's literally stateless, a political orphan. But being stripped of everything really brought into focus the one core principle that had guided her through her entire life.
This quote, this is really the beating heart of her entire autobiography. Her lifelong fight wasn't for capitalism or for communism. It was for the simple, radical principle of individual freedom against any and all forms of coercion, whether that came from a boss, a government, a political party, or even just social pressure.
And this gets to the very core of why she could never accept what was happening in the Soviet Union. She passionately believed that you cannot use unfree methods, like secret police and censorship, to build a free society. It just doesn't work. The tools you use to build your world will determine what that world looks like. You can't use the chains of tyranny to build a palace of freedom.
In the end, reading Living My Life isn't about whether you agree with anarchism or not. It's about grappling with the story of a woman who, right or wrong, lived her entire life with an uncompromising commitment to her ideal of freedom. Her story forces us to ask some really hard questions. Where do we draw the line between the individual and the group? What are we willing to give up for our ideals? And can a truly free society ever be built on a foundation of control? Her life doesn't give us any easy answers, but it does demand that we never stop asking the questions.